I think we all know Sean Baker, the renowned figure in the American independent film scene, and of course the man on Instagram always posting about his physical media and collection of original movie posters. A contemporary indie filmmaker who, with each of his films, champions those left to the wayside by society, those Americans who are just trying to survive on the margins. He trains his camera on the sort of characters rarely given the big screen treatment, finding beauty in their tenacity while also showcasing their many flaws. He really blurs the distinction between fiction and non-fiction in many of his films, by working with a lot of first-time performers, as well as in the way his camera so spontaneously captures its characters and environments. But most importantly, he pays such keen attention to the authenticity of his works, ensuring the particular milieu he is plunging into never has any false notes. His breakout feature, Tangerine, was a comedy about two trans sex workers, shot exclusively on an iPhone 5S in LA. The Florida Project was a snapshot portrait of kids scampering in and around a rundown motel surrounding Disney World. Red Rocket then saw Baker deviating just a bit from his firmly naturalistic approach, ratcheting up his narrative to match the exaggerated lifestyle of his washed-up porn star protagonist. But with Anora, it feels like he's made an entirely different beast altogether. A film that ratchets up the narrative even more, is filled with so many comic hijinks and big choices, and unexpectedly plays like a total crowd pleaser. I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to watch this with a big audience at Fantastic Fest, an experience I will cherish because this is without a doubt one of, if not the best film of the entire year. The titular Anora, otherwise known as Annie, is in typical Baker fashion an exotic dancer and occasional sex worker living in Brighton Beach. Annie excels at her work. She is strong-willed and effervescent person. She also happens to be fluent in Russian. So when a new guest named Ivan, or as others call him, Vanya, enters her Manhattan strip joint, she is by far his ideal choice of dancer. Ivan is a 21-year-old son of a Russian oligarch. He's clearly never worked a single day in his life, spending his time in his Brighton Beach mansion playing video games, smoking weed, living without any responsibility or care in the world. But after that first dance with Annie, he becomes incredibly drawn to her. So much so that their initial meeting quickly escalates from a private dance at the strip club to a week-long, all-expenses-paid girlfriend experiment of sorts, capped off by an off-the-cuff excursion to Vegas on his family's private jet, a trip they return from as a newlywed couple. And from there, the inevitable backlash ensues in a very entertaining fashion. It's a plot that absolutely screams Sean Baker to me. That singular way he has destigmatized sex work throughout his career within these raw, deeply authentic stories that largely take place over a handful of days. But Anora does begin out of the ordinary for a typical Sean Baker film, kicking off almost like a glamorous rom-com of sorts, one not totally dissimilar to something like Pretty Woman, that takes a peek into the allure of the wealthy, fairy tale-like lifestyle. It's a clever sleight of hand from Baker, understanding that once the audience is pulled into the glitz and glamour, it wouldn't be too hard to see why Annie herself is drawn in. So when that rug is inevitably pulled out from under her, and from us rather abruptly, we digest it with a sense of understanding and not a condemnation for her actions. It also helps that, unlike the self-absorbed Mikey and Red Rocket, Annie is so easy to root for here, as despite all the signs pointing toward a doomed fairy tale romance from the very get-go, you're still won over, not only by her, but this coupling as well, at almost every turn. You sink into this whirlwind romance like it's the optimism-filled rom-coms from the 80s or 90s, and in turn, it's not hard to see that Anora is by far Baker's most accessible, crowd-pleasing work yet. Just speaking from my viewing experience alone, the audience was so into every second of this. They were raucous when it warranted it, howling with laughter, rupturing into applause. Then they were silent when reality eventually catches up to our characters, and you realize this wasn't ever going to be a Pretty Woman, but something that looks and moves like a film from the New Hollywood movement. It's shot by the great Drew Daniels, one of my favorite working cinematographers, who is reteaming with Baker here, trading in the 16mm of Red Rocket for anamorphic 35mm that pairs very well with the bright lights of a strip club and the gloom of a New York winter. But it's Baker's eye for performers that continues to be his greatest superpower, as the ensemble that mounts this film is simply electric. It's a cast with every major leading role being held by a professional actor, something I don't think Baker has ever done in his career to this point. But a film like Anora definitely necessitates that, as much of what is asked from the performers here is a lot, to say the least. You have the main source of levity in Mark Edelstein as the oblivious brat who parties with no care in the world. He manages to capture a particular kind of spoiled 20-something who has never had any adult responsibilities without being completely insufferable, a hell of an accomplishment in my book. The underrated Yuri Borisov, who I loved in the film Compartment Number 6, is one of my favorite of the side players. He has this perfect mix of stoicism and a sly sense of humor that makes for a perfect Russian henchman. Ultimately though, the film is a vehicle for Mikey Madison, who is an absolute revelation. She so effortlessly inhabits this character, from delivering some wild lines in her big Brooklyn accent, to being endlessly alluring without any dialogue at all. She's a firecracker of a performer, carrying every single frame of this film and ensuring that the balancing act Baker's script is pulling off doesn't ever take a nosedive. I couldn't fathom a better performance, one more key to a film's success than this one coming out the rest of the year. What Madison does here is a true blue star-making performance that we just don't see very often anymore. At 139 minutes, Anora is Baker's longest film yet, but you don't once feel that length due to the propulsive energy coursing through every single moment of this thing. The length really forces the viewer to sit with the weight of this arduous day that Annie and others are experiencing at the hands of Vanya. It's pretty similar to the way the Safdies weaponized their runtime in Uncut Gems, where you are right in step with the protagonists as they frantically and farcically move through such chaotic spaces. Interestingly though, Anora is definitely a film of two parts. One, a joyous slapstick rollercoaster ride, the other a more stirring drama, because underneath all the goofy hijinks involving Russian fixers and jackrabbit-like sex, there's an intensely moving story about a woman who has been used, cast aside by so many, just waiting for a refuge from the burdens of day-to-day life. Annie sees this possible escape with Vanya to finally live in and with the lavish high rollers she has always had to dedicate herself to and cater her life around, to finally live life on her own terms with no care in the world. And the moments where she gets to live out that fantasy are so moving because of that. These moments are flashes of the wealthy lifestyle that would play as empty visual excess in many films, are moments of real emotional catharsis in Anora, as when that dream begins to crumble and America's promise of who you could be shows how empty it truly is, it's genuinely shattering. To watch a character who fought so hard for her self-preservation, who finally got a taste of a new life, then get a sudden yank back to reality. And Baker pulls it off with a grace that makes its more subdued finale and likely contentious closing shot so resonant. At the end of the day though, it's genuinely heartening to see a filmmaker like Sean Baker finally get his due, winning the Palme d'Or, putting out what is his most critically acclaimed film yet, and one that will no doubt be his biggest moneymaker at the box office. Because he's someone who has done nothing but champion the art of film and speak on the necessity of the theatrical experience in ways we simply don't see many filmmakers with his platform do. And Anora really feels like a film made by an artist that not only loves the art of movie making, but of consuming all kinds of cinema, of keeping an open heart and mind to different stories and ways of storytelling. It's something, at risk of sounding incredibly hyperbolic, that will surely be looked back upon years from now as a seminal work of American cinema. A film that hopefully opens the door to tell a variety of stories from the perspective of sex workers, free from the harmful stigma it holds today. I love Anora so much, and I hope you all fall head over heels for it just like I have.